Well, first of all, thanks for letting me have a look at your images. I always enjoy looking at other people's images. We've got 3 sections to this competition, and we've got 12 entries in each section. And we're going to kick off with this section's entitled Flora. And this image is titled Rosa canina. So can you hear me okay? And can you see the image okay?
You're sounding great to me, Malcolm.
Good.
And me, yeah, all's good.
All's good, yeah.
Now then,
Me,
you may remember, I can't remember what it was it a couple of seasons ago when I was last through at Whitby judging one of your competitions? I was suggesting a few edits here and there, and I think somebody suggested on the night that maybe I could come across one night and demonstrate some of these edits. So what I propose to do tonight is the software I'm using is Canon. I use a Canon camera, and with the Canon camera you get some software, and this allows me to look at pictures, but it's also got some basic editing facilities in it, a little bit of functionality there. It's not sophisticated in any way, it's sort of global edits that I can make, but I think it'll demonstrate 1 or 2 points that I'd like to make. I won't be doing it for every image. We'll be here all night otherwise, but I'll maybe choose 5 or 6 as I'm making my way through, as I'm making my comments. I'll see if I can demonstrate what I'm talking about. Anyway, let's get started. I was asked to mark these out of 20 marks. So what I'm going to do is, as I go through them, I'll give my comments and I'll give the mark as well. I guess you'll know your own images and you'll be able to keep track of your own scores. But this one I thought had lovely natural colours. I like that there were water droplets on the petals. I wasn't sure whether you created those using a spray or something, because there are no water droplets on the leaves, so I just wondered whether you sprayed them. Not that I mind that in the slightest, because I think it was a good idea if you did insert those droplets with a spray. Because I think it always works well on particularly soft looking flowers like this one is. It's well positioned, the main bloom is well positioned in the frame, and I like the little branch coming down from the top right corner as I'm looking at it, and the leaves are on the left hand corner, just sort of lead us into the image, and it's positioned nicely in the frame. I also like that the stamens were nice and sharp. And it's got good depth of field. The leaf to the top is nice and sharp as well. It's very well exposed, and I think the depth of field works quite well, because we've got a diffuse background, which always helps in this kind of image. I would have perhaps liked a wee bit more depth of field, so a smaller aperture, maybe something like f16, something like that, would allow the petal edges, these edges have gone a little bit soft. This is lovely and sharp in here, say the leaves lovely and sharp. It's a little bit soft around the edges, a little more depth of field would have been even better. But still a very good image to start with, and I mark that one as 18. Autumnal tree Maybeck. I love these woods here. In fact, there was over in Sneaton Woods, Falling Foss area, just about 10 days ago. I generally go there each autumn because those lovely beech trees in there can really take on gold and coppery hues if you get good light in there. It's a lovely wood to take autumn photography in. So it's one of my favourite places. Again, I thought this one was really well framed. It's got the big problem you got in woodland is they always say try and sort it out from the chaos, because generally there's trees and branches popping into all parts of the frame, so it's organising it to avoid that chaos. And I think you've done a very good job in the way this tree is positioned in there. There's a few bits of coppice branches and things at the base, which ran the risk of being untidy, but because there's a group of them at both sides of the tree trunk, it kind of balances out and it works really well. There's some lovely light and some lovely colour. There's lovely sharpness to the leaves without being over sharpened. That's one of the things you tend to be, you need to be careful with digital photography. It's so easy to over sharpen leaves and start looking brittle and having harsh edges to them, but that's been nicely done. And that one I really liked, and I gave that one 20 marks. Is this coming through all okay? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Malcolm. I'm hearing you okay.
Lovely. Right, next one is Delicate Wood Sorrel, and it is, isn't it, that lovely main flower in the top third there has been beautifully handled. It looks so delicate. You know, these lovely little woodland flowers, they are tiny, I know, so you've done a very good job at getting down to this low angle and getting this view of it, and it's been very nicely separated, again with the diffuse background, so that the sharpness of the flower and the petals themselves are shown well against that out of focus background. It almost looks three-dimensional. It's been very well exposed too. The problem quite often with these woodland flowers, the white ones in particular, if it's a bright day, it's so easy to burn the highlights out, but all the details there, it's nice and sharp, and good natural colours as well. And as I said, well positioned in the frame. I think it's a little unfortunate that the sort of foreground buds that are coming up just unbalance it slightly. There's nothing the photographer could have done there. I don't advocate that you have a pair of scissors and do a bit of gardening, because we shouldn't be clipping off buds as they're emerging in the natural world. And so I wouldn't want you to go around trimming the base out. It's just a little bit unfortunate that the angle of them, this one on the bottom left leaning out, is a little bit of an unbalance to the picture. But another very good image, and I gave that one 17 marks. Next one, Bananarama. Well, I thought this showed off well how these banana plants grow. We've got the main stem on the left-hand side up here, and then we've got the fruiting branch coming out from the center here. And the fruit, the bananas, are very well exposed and nice and sharp, good natural colors. I think I'm right in saying, as I understand it, once these have ripened, and you can see there's one there at least starting to go yellow, this branch would be chopped off. And I think they chop the banana plant right back to the ground again once that's happened, and they grow from the base. I think I'm right in saying that. When I've been in the Canary Islands, I'm sure that's what we've been told by someone. So yeah, the main bunch of fruit, nicely handled. I did find the junior plant. This is obviously a young banana plant growing for the next season. Has just been caught in some really bright light, and therefore some quite distracting highlights in there. I would have been tempted maybe to crop this off and maybe turn it more into a portrait rather than the squarish format, just to take this area away, just crop it off here so that we held the detail in there. Or alternatively, I don't know whether it was possible, whether you can find a different angle to avoid it, but you've probably quite deliberately chosen this angle because of the background to the plant. There might have been something horrendous in the background if you'd gone further around. But as it was, largely I think because of that very bright highlight distraction on the right-hand side, I marked that one as 13. The Pleasures of Breezy Knees, this one's titled. Now then, this is my ignorance. What I was thinking, breezy knees, is that what the name of this plant is? I was initially thinking. So I did a little bit of research, as you do on Google, and discovered that it's a garden near York. I wasn't aware that it was there. So it was an interesting find for me, that. Again, it's a lovely specimen, isn't it? That it's pristine. Quite often A lot of these flowers have tended to be nibbled away, or they're going past the best, a few brown bits here and there. But this is a lovely, pristine specimen, set against those lovely autumnal colours, which again separate the main bloom from the background quite nicely, just by having the different, obviously the white contrast against the autumnal colours. It's well exposed, and again, it's lovely and sharp where it needs to be sharp, and a good depth of field all the way through the bloom. I just felt on this one that maybe if this bloom was positioned a little bit lower in the frame, so a crop, something like that, would strengthen the image. I'm going to try, and you tell me if this works. But what I was thinking is maybe cropping this image something like that. So I've got rid of a bit of this side, a bit of the base. And excuse me a minute, I'll just have to trim that down to bring the bloom into sort of the bottom third. For me, just strengthen the image. I'll undo that now and cancel that, and you can see the difference. Now, did that work at your end? Could you see what I was doing there?
We did get that. Thank you very much indeed, Malcolm.
Yeah, good. But I liked it very much as it was, and I gave that one 16 marks anyway. This one's titled Must Be Springtime. Again, I appreciate that you've got good and low to get this daffodil bloom face on almost. You're obviously probably only about 30 centimeters, or in old school, about a foot from the ground probably. Appreciate that you got good and low, and it's quite important to get the right angle of view on these things. It fills the frame, it's lovely and sharp, and again it's very well exposed, especially in this bright sunlight. You can see it's a very sunny day and quite contrasty, but there's nothing burnt out, and the shadows have not blocked up. We can see detail even in the shadows as well, so the exposure has been handled very well. I did think that the background this time kind of unbalanced it a wee bit, because we've got a silhouette of a tree on one side and the clear blue sky on the other, and for me it just sort of unbalanced the image to some extent. And again, it might have just been a case of maybe finding a different angle, and I know exactly what happens here. This is almost macro photography. You're concentrating on getting the detail, getting everything sharp where you want it sharp, and getting things in the frame. And it's so easy to miss what's happening in the background. And I think this is one of those occasions where maybe a little bit of looking around all the corners of the frame to make sure you've got a best balanced image that you can. And it's just a pity. It's just the background and balances of it. Everything else has been handled really well. And I gave that one 16 marks also. This one's titled Hothouse Beauty. And again, I thought this was really positioned well in the frame. It's almost a symmetrical effect, isn't it? We've got the main bud centre top, and then we've got the streams coming down from the bud. That's all working really well. And again, we've got a depth of field which shows the main part of the subject off nice and sharply, but with an aperture that has sent the background into slightly out of focus, make it diffuse slightly, but also there's enough information there to tell us about the rest of the plant. Again, very well exposed, nicely handled. It's sharp to an extent. When I looked at this on my monitor, I could see all this detail here was lovely and sharp. And we've got these, I don't know whether these are seed pods or what, I don't know this plant at all, but this is all nice and sharp in here. I've mentioned the aperture being set correctly to get a diffuse background slightly out of focus, but I would have just liked a little more depth of field so that this area here was a little sharper too. That's gone quite soft. The main area of focus is slightly behind there, and we see that in the effect of the bits coming off from the centre bud as well. So again, just a little more depth of field would have got this one right to the top. But as it was, I gave it 18 marks. Waiting for the sun. Again, the photographers got a collection of absolutely pristine blooms here. And I know from my own experience of photographing flowers, you've really got to catch them at exactly the right time, because some of them, especially tulips, will go past the best, they'll blow, they'll be opened up. You'll get snails that have been chewing through the leaves, things like that. And these are absolutely prime specimens. I think you've probably waited for exactly the right time to take this image. I like the fact that the red tulips have been placed against this dark background, because that really helps to show them off. I don't know if it's a wall or something, but it works really well, that dark background. And the base, was that a bit of Aubrietia, and is that yellow alyssum or something as well? Just sets the scene of spring really well. It looks slightly flat on my monitor, and I think it's another one that I'd like to demonstrate a little bit of editing, because I think the blacks need punching up here. Now then, as I say, this software is very basic stuff. So what I'm going to do is, it allows me to have a look at the levels. And obviously, if I was really editing my images, I don't use this software at all, but it's quite handy for demonstration purposes. I'd be using Photoshop, but you can obviously, using Photoshop, you get exactly the same in the terms of, this tells us about the picture, and at this end of the scale, as you can see from this chart here, this is where the black pixels are, and over at this end, as this bar chart shows, this is where the white pixels are. And when I first saw it, I thought, this is lacking in blacks. So what I'm going to do now is, using this black slider here, if I just slide it up to the start of the histogram, hopefully you can see that it's enhancing the blacks in there, and it removes the apparent flatness that I could see without doing that. I'll just undo that now, and you see the difference that it makes. I think that's something that's certainly worth doing to this image here. I need to go back now. I just need to, yeah. So that's the only suggestion I'll make that image, because otherwise I think it's an excellent piece of photography, just lacking in blacks, which makes it look a little bit flat. And I gave it 19 marks. Flower native of Madeira. I think this is an agapanthus. I'm not sure. I think it is. Again, this diffuse background works very well and makes the bloom almost look three-dimensional. The bloom itself and stalk are all perfectly sharp, and we can see every bit of detail there. And I really love the way the light was coming through these petals here. It's been shot against the light, or light coming from above, and the light's passing through those petals, and it gives a lovely effect. And because of the diffuse background, again, it almost makes it look three-dimensional. Now on my monitor, I don't know whether you can see this now with it being transmitted over the internet, I could see some streaks in the background, which initially I thought, oh, it's maybe been taken in the rain, this, and then it dawned on me that there's no sign of any water droplets on the bloom. So maybe it was a sprinkler or something in the background, but it does actually help to the background. Just the light passing through these water droplets as they're falling helps as well. What else? I think it's been positioned well in the frame. It's nicely exposed and a great depth of field. I think it's just unfortunate that it's taken from this angle. I think it would have been great taken from the other side, so we could have really seen the star effect of these flowers. But then I guess the reason you've taken it from this angle is so that you've got this lovely background, and there's probably something horrendous if you'd taken it the other way around, which would have ruined the shot. It's just one of those unfortunate things that there maybe was a better angle, but you wouldn't have got this background that you've got here, and you wouldn't have got the light maybe coming through it. But as it was, I gave it 17 marks. Morning Dew. Again, an example of water droplets. And it's amazing how it works particularly well with flowers and leaves, that kind of thing. I think, is this an iris? I think. And I just love the way the effect of the light coming through these water droplets. You know, we've got the highlights reflecting the bright sky. We can see it's sort of fairly bright. And then you've got the reflected blues coming back from the petals as well. It's a lovely effect. We get that reflected light coming through those little drops of water. It works really well. I appreciate the angle that you've got down good and low to get down onto this bloom, and rather than shooting from above. And it's not an easy thing to sort of get down there. You really got to work at getting this image in the frame the way that you want it, and I appreciate it that you've done that. It's just a pity that there's very little in focus again. It's a little bit similar to one of the other ones where it's lacking in depth of field. If you look, these water droplets here are lovely and sharp, and some of these are quite sharp in here. But after that, there's not very much sharp at all. And I think it just needed a smaller aperture, maybe something like f11, f16, which might have, I don't know whether this was taken on a tripod, but once you start getting down to those kind of apertures, it obviously extends the exposure time. So you would probably need a tripod to make sure that you weren't getting camera shake when you were taking the image. Just a little more depth of field would have really helped with that one. But Morning Dew, I gave 16 marks to. Beech trees. I really like the treatment of this one. The base of the copper beech leaves provides a good strong base to it. I wasn't sure, I suspect you might have elongated these. They look a bit tall and less bunched than happens naturally in woodland for beech trees. I may be wrong, but I don't mind if you have stretched them. The effect works quite well. I like the way the light's coming, this side lighting coming through the woodland, helps to make it sort of a three-dimensional effect. You know, we've got a bit of recession coming through with the light and shade, and it gives it a certain amount of depth. Initially, I was a bit concerned about the inclusion. I think this is the pine tree looking at the bar on the right-hand side. It just didn't quite seem to fit. And I thought, oh, well, maybe that needs cropping out. And I tried that, and it ruins it basically, because this one being in sharper focus and different texture really adds to the three-dimensional effect, the depth of the image. When I cropped that off, you lost a lot of that effect, and I think the photographers obviously thought about the inclusion of that and has done the right thing to include it, because it really does help. My only suggestion on this one was that I found it on my monitor a little dark, too dark in the base. I said, although I like the base, given a good solid base, it's maybe a little too dark and a little bit dense in this area. With a little bit of selection, I can't show this edit with this bit of software, but in Lightroom or Photoshop, whatever you use, if you made a selection of this area and that area and just lifted the shadows a little bit, because I found it a little on the dense side. But even so, it's one I like very much. I scored that one. Let me get that right. Don't want to give you the wrong scores. 19 marks. The last one in this part of the competition, Nature's Miniature Christmas Tree. The exposure on this one and the focus is absolutely spot on. Again, we've got these water droplets on the spider's web. Exposure handled perfectly because we can see from the direction of the light coming down from here. That's where the light source is. We've got that striking through the water droplets, and I think the exposure has been handled really well. They look like little diamonds without being burnt out. You're always going to get highlights in it, but they don't look burnt out in any way. And this is perfectly sharp in here. I think obviously the spider's web really helps in this one, because that's helped to capture those dewy drops, and that's worked really well. Yeah, this again, I think when I checked, because with having them as a JPEG, I can have a look at the metadata to see what camera settings are being used to get it, because I thought, oh, I'd have just liked a little bit more depth of field on this one with a smaller aperture. And I checked to see what had been used, and it was f2.8. I was actually amazed that you got this much depth of field at f2.8. So I was thinking we could really have done with something like f16 just to get a bit more sharpness and some more of this spider's web, and maybe some of these sharper points in focus. I think that would have really helped. But as I said earlier, it depends if you had a tripod with you now or not. If you didn't, you probably compromised and had to open the aperture up, and you've ended up with an f2.8. Again, if you'd had a tripod, you could have, because this, in these conditions, would be pretty still. It wouldn't have been blowing about. We could have had a longer exposure at f16 and got a bit more depth. I also think, just a suggestion, although I like this image very much, again, I thought it was one that would have benefited from a little bit tighter crop on it. I'm going to suggest something like this. I'd like to use this diagonal of these two bits here, more or less going from corner to corner. I'll just stretch that out a wee bit. I think you need to keep this part in as well. And I've just tightened it up a wee bit. Although I don't mind negative space around things, I thought there was just a wee bit too much on this one. So just cropped it a wee bit tighter, something like that, and then with a bit more depth of field, that would have scored even higher than it did. But I'll cancel all that now and show you it as it was presented. It's still a great image, and the last one in this competition I gave 19 marks to.
Right, thank you so much for going through the fauna entries, Malcolm, and thanks for those comments.
What do you want to do, Graham? Do you want to? I'm quite happy to take any questions or discussion at this stage, or do you just want me to push on?
I think we could just be happy to crack on, Malcolm, and then if you maybe people could hold questions until the end, that would be great.
Okay. I'll just have a little sip. Right. So we're moving on to fauna now, the next category. And this one's titled Wannabe Wallaby. Again, it's basically well exposed. I'll just suggest that it might be slightly overexposed. It looks a little bit flat, and it's a bit like the tulips. If you address the blacks, it really punches it up a wee bit. And there is a little bit of burnout on this side of the wallaby's cheek here. We lost a bit of detail in there. It is slightly overexposed, but not greatly. I love the way the light's coming through his ears here. We've got these little tufty bits around his ears, and the light coming through there works really well. The depth of field here is exceptional. It's sharp from the tip of the nose all the way through to the back of the ears. It goes off a wee bit there, but you totally expect that. The critical thing with animals, as with humans, is to make sure that the eyes are sharp. And here we can see it's lovely and sharp around this area here. That's all been nicely handled. So a very good effort to start with. When I put it on my monitor, it's probably about half a stop over, I suppose. It just needs the blacks addressing a wee bit, similar to the tulip one. And I gave that one 16 marks. This is called Lonely Stag. Well, it's a great stag portrait, and it's a great angle. Shows the beast off well. I've got this nice lighting on the right-hand side of the stag's face. And it's posing well for the image. It fills the frame well. In all those respects, it's been nicely handled. But it seems to lack a bit of quality. Now, I didn't know whether that was deliberately some kind of treatment that it's had. And I was just a bit concerned. I could see these halos around this area here, and particularly around the hind and down the back of this leg here, which looked a bit like cloning. You've been cloning bits to take bits out. Or is it some artistic effect that you deliberately wanted to use to make it a bit more of a creative image? But for me, unfortunately, it just lacks a bit of quality. We've lost a lot of detail in it. And I think in a competition that's titled Fauna, I think it's quite important that it looks quite natural. And for me, this had a bit more of a creative effect with the editing that has been done around it. It just didn't quite work in this competition for me, but it's a great pose and a great position of a composition of a stag. I gave it 13 marks. Look at My Nose, or Is It My Ears, is the title of this one, which I guess is reference to this bit here. Again, a demonstration of diffuse background to separate the main subject. That has been nicely done. And again, this is a little bit like the iris flower. It's got a very shallow depth of field. And I think you can see from the hairs on this leg here and this leg here, that's the point that is in focus. After that, there's nothing that's truly in focus, and importantly, not the eye, because as I mentioned a couple of ones back, it's important to think in natural history, as with humans, that we get the eye sharp. It's the most critical thing. And again, because I had a look at the metadata, and this is f2.8. So once you've got this close to this tiny subject, you're talking about maybe at f2.8, there's maybe only going to be about 3 or 4 millimeters that are going to be critically sharp, and the rest is inevitably going to be soft. So it's another one that I think if you did the f2.8 would have been okay if we'd had the eye sharp. And sometimes it creates a nice artistic effect to have the eye sharp and the rest of it with a very shallow depth of field, not quite in focus. I think that would have worked, but I think again, it's probably one that needed something like f8, f11, maybe f16 to get more of the body in focus with the eye as well. There are a few distracting highlights around the image as well. I think maybe well, certainly darken them down, but possibly even clone them out. There's enough information here you can copy and clone over the top of this bright highlight here. And similarly with the top one at the top, it maybe just have to do with darkening the base down a bit, because it's generally true, I'm sure you've heard judges saying in the past, that your eye tends to get drawn to the brighter parts of the image, and my eye kept wandering particularly to this bottom left-hand corner. So they could do with being darkened down. So look at my nose, or is it my ears? I gave 14 marks to. Lockjaw. Well, here we are. We've got a bit of natural history, behavioural photography. These herring gulls doing what herring gulls do, being very aggressive with one another and anything else that gets in there, generally speaking. Typical aggressive nature. And considering these are white birds, as I mentioned earlier, the white objects can be quite tricky to make sure you get the exposure right. And what has been helpful here, I think, it's we can see from the very limited shadows, it's not been a particularly bright day, so it's not been too contrasty. And that, I think, has been quite helpful because we can see quite a bit of detail under this gull's wings, but the detail is all held in the whites. Lovely and sharp, well exposed. For me, because of where you come from, I would have loved these herring gulls to be on some of the crab pots or somewhere near the harbour. Just this curbside location just jars a wee bit. I think that's probably, especially coming from a Whitby camera club, maybe is influencing my judgment on that one. But very well executed and 17 marks. Pumpkin seeds for lunch. Again, I appreciated that you got low. I mean, obviously, this thing's probably on, what are they, about 6 to 9 inches tall on the ground. So I can see from the angle that we've got here, you've taken the trouble to get good and low, to get down at eye level. We've got some lovely side lighting coming through that has brought out all the texture in the fur here and created that lovely catch light in the squirrel's eye. Perfectly sharp, great depth of field. I mean, it's sharp right from the paws, right through the nose, eyes, ears, and it just starts going a wee bit soft at the back of the tail here. So that's as good as you're ever going to get. Depth of field and focusing, exceptionally well handled. A little bit of diffuse background, which works quite well, and very well positioned in the frame. I think it works really well. Congratulations, and I gave that one 20 marks. Again, it's a limited depth of field, but crucially, this area here is sharp. You know, the eye and the nose and everything has been the point of focus here, even though that's not the center of the frame that the autofocusing might have picked up. So you've either manually focused or known how to adjust your autofocus to make sure that the bit that you wanted sharp is sharp. It falls off a little bit towards the back. And to be honest, I would have liked a little more, so we could have got some of this detail, this speckled in spotting down the tail. You're never going to get it all the way through, and I would like a little bit more detail in this leg. And again, I couldn't resist checking to see the aperture, that this is f5.5. So again, something like f8, something 11. And it's taken in quite bright light. I know they can fidget and jump about these things, so you're probably being desperate to have a fairly fast shutter speed to make sure there wasn't any motion blur there. But it just would have been nice to have a little bit more depth of field. But the critical point is focused well. It's very well exposed. My only main suggestion on this one would be a little bit tighter crop, because there's quite a lot of out of focus stone in the background, and I'll just see what you think with this suggestion. Just going a wee bit tighter, leave plenty of space in front of it to go into. There's a little bit of a bright highlight in the base there, which maybe needs to come out. So we end up, that's maybe a little bit on the tight side. I'll just give it a little bit more space. Something like that would be just mainly get out of focus rock in the background. I'll cancel it so that you can see it as presented. Just might give it another point or two, but even as it was, I gave it 18 marks. This is my tree, this one's called. Again, sharp and well exposed. Again, we can see all the detail in the fir. His little front paws, lovely and sharp. We've got the detail in all the fur. Another catchlight in that eye that works really well. It really helps, and lovely and sharp. I was a little concerned about what was going on back here. It looks as if it's dipped his tail in some red, in some green paint or something. I'm not quite sure what's going on there, and I just found that a little bit strange. It's well placed in the frame. I like the idea that it's placed basically on the third here as we look at it. But I just felt the tree on the right-hand side was kind of unbalancing it, almost overpowering the squirrel to some extent. I think you could have maybe afforded to make a selection of at least half of the right-hand side of the tree, maybe softened it a wee bit, because it is critically sharp, and if you just put a little bit of softer focus on that, it just takes your eye more to the squirrel, and maybe even darken the highlights on the right-hand side, just to avoid the tree competing with the squirrel, really. But still very good as it is, and another one I gave 19 marks to. Gannet at Bempton Cliffs. Yeah, I got a few at Bempton a couple of years ago. And when you look at this image and you think, oh, well, it's just slowly gliding past, and quite an easy photograph to get. It is not. I appreciate the difficulty because they're actually gliding quite quickly. So picking them up and getting the focus and getting them in the frame in the way that you have here, composed with this lovely diagonal coming down through the wings, through the corners, top left to bottom right. I really appreciate the skill required to do that, because although they're not even flapping the wings, they're still gliding past at quite a speed, and picking them up and getting focus is not as easy as it might might appear when you look at this image. Really appreciate the exposure that you've got here. Look at the detail we can see in the flight feathers on the underside. So this is on the shade side. We've got all that detail in there. The exposure at the taking stage has been exceptionally well handled, and I suspect a little bit of processing that you've done, maybe with the dodge tool, to lift the highlights and maybe lighten the shadows under the wings, has been exceptionally well done. And look at that eye, critically sharp, and the beak. The focusing on this is perfection. My only slight suggestion is, really nitpicking here because it's an excellent image, is I would have maybe darkened the sky down a bit if you could have done that, just to give a little more separation, because the bird is principally shades of white to off-white, and the lighter background is not setting off as well as it might have. If the sky had just been darkened slightly, and talking just a smidgen here, it would just made it stand out a little more. But even so, I think it's a great image and deserved 20 marks. When Small is More, this one's titled. Lovely study of this little blue-tit fledgling. The exposure and focus has been really well handled. It looks a little bit soft, and I'm going to suggest something in a minute, but basically the focusing is spot on. Again, we've got the diffuse background, which helps set the blue tit off. I thought it was a little bit of pity that we've got this pristine woodwork that it's perched on, probably waiting for one of the parents to come and feed it, I suspect, which is quite bright. And again, it's this thing about your eye tends to get drawn to the brighter part of the image. And And if you could have just made a selection there and darkened the highlights down, you could burn the highlights down or make a selection, use the highlights and shadows tool just to darken the highlights down a bit. And then your eye would have been more drawn to the bird and less to the piece of bright woodwork that's there. I said it's essentially sharp, but it is, and there's lovely detail in here. I can see that's all, the point of focus has been really well done. But it would benefit from a little bit of sharpening. And what happens here is that when we resize images, you might be starting off with something like 6,000 by 4,000 pixel images that come off your camera, and then we resize it for entering into competitions, and you throw a lot of pixels away, which inevitably softens it a little bit. And what I would generally recommend is, what I would normally do is just select the bird. So you've made a selection. I can't do that in this software, so I'm going to do some global sharpening here to the whole image. And this is the tool that you've got in Photoshop. I'll just pull that out of the way. So unsharp amount, something round about 100. And in terms of radius, this is in pixels, so something like about 0.5 of pixel. Maybe that's a bit sharp. You see how it's starting going a little bit harsh around the feathers. Maybe something like 0.4 on the pixels. Now see how lovely and sharp that becomes. I'll undo it and you'll see what I meant, that I could tell it was focused correctly, but just appeared a little bit soft. And as I said, that's because of resizing it and losing a lot of pixels. Now I'll undo the sharpening that I've just done, and hopefully you can see the difference that makes in doing that. So just a little suggestion, because it is, as I mentioned, it's critical that the eye looks sharp, and that's the way to do it. But as it was, I gave it 16 marks. This one's called Feeling Chirpy. So we've got this robin singing away, some good bird behavior in the spring, some tricky lighting here, because you can see the back of the bird is catching the sunlight that's coming through the canopy, but he's probably quite deliberately got himself in the shade, so he's less obvious to the predators. I think that's what they tend to do, tend to hide themselves away to some extent. So it's tricky lighting. We've got bright sunlight on the back and shadow on the front. So the exposure has been handled well, because we can see the detail in there, and the highlights have not been blown out on the back of the robin. That's all been nicely handled. For me, just there's a couple of little things. I did find this broken branch tip here a little bit of a distraction, and I would have been personally inclined to just clone that out. We could have copied some of this leaf from here and just gone over the top of there just to avoid that distraction. It is also slightly the composition, it's quite central in the frame, and I think maybe I looked at how we could strengthen that. I think it would have worked well if we could have put it on the thirds, and maybe we could have cropped this part, because we've got some bright highlights here also. I'd have been tempted maybe to crop this out of this side here, got rid of those highlights, and that would have brought the bird onto one of the thirds, but left plenty of space in front of it, just to take it away from being a centrally placed robin. But I still liked it as it was, and Feeling Chirpy, I gave 16 marks to. Another robin posing for the photographer. Again, it's in focus. We can see it's sharp in there, and it has been exposed well, because again we've got light and shade here, and that's been nicely handled. A nice little catch light in the eye here, but this, for some reason, it lacks the feather detail. It looks, we've lost any sort of detail here. It looks a little bit soft in the sense that we can't see the texture of the feathers. And I just wondered whether this had maybe started off as a much larger image and you cropped into it to get this part of the frame, and as a consequence maybe lost some of the quality. And we've got a few distracting highlights, and I think this would have benefited. This particular highlight in the top left hand corner really pulls your eye, and this bright patch down here. I think maybe we could have avoided that. We could go much tighter on the robin and make it almost a square format, crop in here and along by there, and that would have put the bird in the bottom third, again avoiding it being placed centrally. We've still got this very bright highlight here, which is a bit of a problem, but depending on your editing skills, you could have maybe done something like that to darken it down. I think for me, the main thing would be to avoid these bright highlights, top and bottom, and just sort of crop in a bit tighter around the bird. Robin posing for photographer, I gave 14 marks to. The last one is class Piglet. Well, it's we've talked about the need for sharpness where you want it, and this one is exactly that. The eyes are lovely and sharp, and again we've got light coming through the rim light on the hairs on the piglet's ears, and that's really is lovely, isn't it? Nice and sharp in there. I would have liked a little bit more depth of field, although the critical area is sharp, and I appreciate that you've got that spot on. It would have been nice if we could have got the snout sharp as well. It's just slightly out of focus there. We've got, unfortunately, because of the direction, we can see how bright the light is, the light source here. I'm not sure whether it's a lamp or some daylight getting in from somewhere, but we can see we've got a very bright light here, and there's a little bit of burnout on the back of this piglet, which again, depending on your editing skills, you could have maybe done some with, especially if you'd shot in RAW, you'd be able to pull that out, I'm sure. And I would have just been inclined to crop this a little bit tighter. I think what I'm talking about here is we've got the back end of this piglet going out of frame here, and we've got a couple of back ends here. I'd have just been inclined maybe to avoid this and just crop in around it. Obviously you need to go through that gap there and include all of that piglet there. Just to avoid, we've got animals going out of both edges of the frame, which is always something that pulls your eye, and if they've not been there, it just concentrates your eye on the main subject on it. But Piglet, I gave 15 marks to, and that's the last one in that class.
Thank you, Malcolm. Do you feel the need to take a 5-minute break, or are you happy to go through the last segment?
I'm happy to go through the last segment, Graham. I'm just having a little sip there to wet the whistle.
Okay, that's great then, thank you.
Okay, part C. It's not advancing for some reason. Are you still with me?
We can still see the piglet.
Right, so can I. It won't advance for some reason. Let me see.
Did you want to briefly drop out of sharing and come back into sharing, or?
Might have to do that, I think. Yeah, we'll try that. Let's see if I can. Oh, it still won't go. Just bear with me. I'll drop out again. I'll go into.
Maybe if you drop out of Zoom browser and pop back into Zoom browser again.
Yeah. Oh, for some reason, it's locked in on that one. Yeah, I'll have to close that down. I think just with me, Greg. I'll close that down.
Thank you. Well, a demonstration isn't a demonstration unless it's a sort of technical challenge.
Yeah. Right. I'm getting a message saying my connection is unstable, so I think that's the problem.
I'm going to give it one last try, Malcolm, but if you still have no success, what I'll do, I'll try and bring the images up on my screen and
Right.
I'll do the projection effectively and you can talk over it.
Right. I think I've got there now. I'm reconnecting and see if this works. Is that coming through? Is that coming through?
Yeah,
We've got
can
a
see
third
that.
edge showing, Malcolm.
Right, that's where we should be. Good, yeah. Yeah, I think I had a temporary blip on my internet connection there. So yeah, close-up section. This is called Coiled Spring. So hopefully you can see that okay. These emerging ferns are a really great subject for close-up work. I think it's been handled really well. It's very sharp around this. You can see all this detail here, the tight curl, and it's sharp as it's starting to open up here. It's been well exposed and it's got a good depth of field. Again, just one or two distracting, unbalancing in the background. This bright highlight here, just probably darken that down a wee bit. And again, it's a bit like the daffodil one. We've got this dark brown section top right, rather than this pebbled looking grey background in the rest of it, which kind of unbalances it a wee bit, which is a little bit of a pity because the main fern has been handled really well, and I gave that 16 marks. Are these coming through okay now?
Yeah, well, I'm certainly getting the pictures and the audio fine, thank you.
Good. This one's called Look Closely. This one had me puzzled. I was trying to work out what it was. I think it's some kind of plant. I thought maybe an artichoke or something like that. I wasn't sure at all, and it doesn't really matter. It's a close-up subject, and you've taken it for that purpose. I thought the colours in the bottom half of the image are a little bit dull, which tends to make it lack a bit of interest, really. It's a little bit soft as well. There's only really this one section here that is sharp, and the depth of field thereafter falls off pretty quickly. And I just wondered, I could see the top section of this plant, whatever it is. There is a bit better light and better colours. We've got these warmer browns in this section here. I just wondered if we could have maybe concentrated in this area here, where there is some better light and better colours. It would have been a bit more interesting, particularly as this area here is dull and out of focus. Maybe something in this area here, inclusion there, would have worked better and created a stronger image. So Look Closely, I gave 15 marks to. Plant Detail. Well, it's really well composed, this, isn't it? The sort of center part of the plant. I guess these are embryo leaves. Are these New Zealand palms? These embryo leaves shown in cream have been well positioned in the frame, and I liked the use of this leaf bottom right to lead us into the image, being well composed. And then we've got the background leaves, which create a lovely background to it, and all helps to draw your eye to the center of the image, because we've got the stems of the leaves coming in and leading into the center all the way around. So I think the photographers thought out the composition of this well. The soft lighting, I think, has been helpful as well. There's brightness there, but it's not harsh sunlight. So we've not got these problems of bright highlights and dark shadows. The soft diffuse light has been very helpful here and allowed us to see all the detail. It's lovely and sharp where it needs to be sharp. All this detail here is fantastic and very well exposed and well composed. And I did like that one, and that was 17 marks. Fungi family, this one's called. Again, appreciation that you've got down. I know I've been doing a little bit of macro photography over the last year. I got myself a decent macro lens, and I've been doing a little bit of this. And I know you've probably been laid on your belly to get this angle of view. These fungi popping up through what looks like forest bark to get this angle of view. I appreciate the trouble you've taken to get this angle. The main subjects, these elements here, are really well positioned in the frame and have been technically well handled, they're sharp and well exposed. There's one or two, again, distracting highlights in the background that could have been darkened down a wee bit. And hopefully I can demonstrate a suggestion here. As I thought, maybe the shadows could have been lifted on this, although I think the exposure itself of the fungi has been really well handled. I thought the shadows could have benefited from lifting a wee bit, and I'm sure you know that in Lightroom we can use the highlights and shadows tool probably to deal with this. Again, I'll just need to move this. I haven't got highlights and shadows in this bit of software, so I'm going to use curves. And for those of you that know how to edit in Photoshop, you'll know with the curves tool what this is telling me. This is telling me this part of the line, the graph, is the dark parts of the image, and these are the light parts of the image. And if I want to darken the image or lighten the image, I need to use this scale here. So I'm now, by working in this area here, which you can see the dark bits, I'm dealing with the shadows, and to lighten them, I just push that slider up a wee bit there, something like that, I would suggest. And that is effectively, it's like using, say, the highlight shadows tool to lift the shadows. I'll undo that now and take us back to where we were. I don't know whether you thought that was an improvement or not, but just lifting the shadows for me seemed to help that one. But even so, I thought it was a great image, and I gave it 19 marks. Heads and tails, nicely lit to create this rim lighting around the embossed part of the coins. It sort of makes a nice relief to the coins there. It's been well exposed to make sure that the highlights are not burnt out. Obviously, we've got bright parts because of the lighting on it, which has created this relief. So it's been nicely exposed without burning out the highlights. It's just got very limited sharpness, unfortunately. You can see perhaps the crown is sharp, some of this lettering is sharp here, but all these edges, the lettering is quite soft. And similarly over on this side here, there's very little that's sharp. So again, because I couldn't resist having a look at the metadata. And this was taken at f2.4. So again, once you've got really close into something like this, you're with f2.4, you've maybe got 1 or 2 millimeters depth of field to the image. And again, it was one that needed a little bit more, maybe something like f8 would have given you greater depth of field, which would have made the overall image look sharper. And again, it might be, I don't know whether you're using a tripod or not, but it might be one of those compromises. You've had to open up the aperture to get shutter speed you wanted, but by using a tripod, it's all totally under your control. These coins are not going to be moving anywhere. It doesn't matter if the exposure takes 2 minutes. By putting it on the tripod, using a smaller aperture, everything's going to be nice and sharp. And that, for me, it needed to be in this case with this particular subject. Although I appreciated the exposure and the lighting that's being used, it just suffers from a lack of overall sharpness, which is a pity. I gave it 15 marks. B, Lookout. I thought this was a great bit of natural history photography and something rarely seen. I've never seen it in a competition before, this kind of photograph. I've seen it in magazines and things, but first time I've seen it in a competition. I would imagine that probably not everybody would be comfortable with putting themselves in this position. You've obviously got very close to these bees, maybe indicate that the photographer has some knowledge of the behavior of bees and was felt quite comfortable taking the image. I think it's a really interesting natural history behavioral shot. It's been well exposed. To be highly critical about it, just nitpicking, again, it maybe lacks a bit of sharpness. There's you know, a couple of heads here that are sharp, maybe this one at the bottom, and the others are a bit soft. And I don't think this is a focusing issue. I think it's maybe a movement issue, because I would imagine these bees are twitching away, probably scratching away. I'm not sure they're chewing at this wood as well. So there's going to be some movement there, and it might have been a case that the shutter speed wasn't quite fast enough, and you've got a little bit of motion blur in there on some of them, which is a little bit of a pity, but it is a great image and one that I did like and appreciate that you'd taken the trouble to do and really knew what you were doing to get it. And I've given that one 18 marks. Let Me Out of This Cage, this one's titled. Some kind of flower bud. I'm not sure what this flower is. I really like the way that you compose this image. Putting the bud in the thirds, I've talked about shifting the robins off the center and maybe position them on the third. Here's an example of how that helps. I think with composition, it just makes it stronger in the frame by putting it in that position there. I think that's been well done. It is quite bright, and I think the photographers deliberately made this relatively high key, which has helped show the structure and detail of this, in the title is called The Cage, that the flower is trying to get out of. So obviously the sharpness is where it needs to be. I think it is essential that this structure of the bud is nice and sharp, and that I appreciate that you've got that right. And I think, say, you've deliberately made it slightly high key to show that off. Inevitably, by doing that, we've got, I think, some bright highlights in the background. And again, I think this is another one that could have maybe done with the highlights and shadows tool, just to darken those highlights down in the background. And I'm going to attempt to show what I mean by, again, using the tone curves tool. So here I'm going to, again, worked in the shadows on the fungi. With this one, I'm going to work on the highlights. So by pulling this part of the curve down a wee bit, it just darkens the highlights down a wee bit to something like that. And say in Photoshop or Lightroom, you would have used the highlights shadows tool to do that. But like most things in editing, there are at least 3 ways to do these things. So I'll undo that, and I don't know whether you think that benefited the image or not, but for me, those background highlights were a bit too bright. But still a great image, and I gave it 17 marks. Autumnal Webs, this one's titled, webs in the plural. So I think the photographer wanted us to know that the web created by the autumnal bracken is an integral part of the image, and it's not just about the spider's web in the center of the frame. I think some lovely colours, autumnal colours in the bracken there. And I really liked the detail. I think there's maybe a bit of frost in this. I'm not sure. I think this is frost hanging in the spider's web, and I think there's a little bit on this frond of bracken in the base here. And all that effect is really well done. The exposure's been really well handled. I think it's been well exposed, and it's sharp. We can see all this detail in here, really well handled. Could it have been improved? I'm not sure whether we needed all this space, because again, my eye was getting pulled, because it's relatively pale compared to, my eye was getting pulled a wee bit to the side, and the spider's web is quite central. I could maybe trim a bit off this side here. Not all of it. I don't want to go right into here. We certainly want this detail here. Maybe crop a wee bit off there. I would have really loved it if you could have got at 90 degrees of this to shoot into or from behind the spider's web. But I don't know what the background would have been if that had been the case, taken from 90 degrees either side of the spider's web. But I was just thinking, well, wouldn't it have been great to see the whole of that spider's web front on or from back with what looks to be some nice light coming through it. But the photographer knows far better than me, because they were there at the time. There might have been something horrendous in the background that would have ruined it. But I still like this one very much. Autumnal Webs, 16 marks. Pink Wonder. Well, very close up, this one. Certainly fits the theme of the competition. I think this is a rhododendron or azalea bloom. We got in really tight to it. Couple of things. I think by going in this tight, I think we really need these stamens to be sharp. I think that the focus point on this is somewhere in the back, in the throat of this flower. And I think it's one of those, you've really got to decide when you've got this amount of depth of field, which part of it do I want to be critical sharp. For me, I would have liked these stamens to be sharp rather than the background petal. You're never going to get depth of field all the way through in this thing, so you've got to make a decision of where you want the focus to be. And it's one of those things. Sometimes you can get away with an arty effect of only a very small part of the image being soft. Being sharp, and letting a very small depth of field create an arty effect. This would have worked, I think, if you'd gone in here and made those sharp and had the diffused background. It would have created a nice background. But as it is, it's a bit of that unbalanced thing again. In the background, we've got this dark area top left as I'm looking at it, as opposed to the lighter area top right. I just wondered if you'd maybe move round a little bit to the left-hand side and shot more across it, and then we would have had a more balanced, even background to the main part of the image, would have avoided that unbalancing of it. As it was, Pink Wonder, 14 marks. This one's titled, Now I Can Spread My Wings. Another great bit of natural history photography, emerging dragonfly. I think a photographer's done a good job here again of getting the angles right, getting low. This has all been happening in amongst these leaves here. So it's probably been quite a struggle to get an angle where you could photograph this event happening. And I think you've done a good job of getting in as best you can. You can see this lower leaf, bottom left is in, could potentially interfere with this, but you've managed to avoid that by getting down low and choosing this angle that you have. That's I appreciate that you've taken the trouble to do that. It's well exposed and it's sharp. And again, I'm going to suggest a little bit of sharpening on this one. I'll demonstrate that. And I would, you've heard me talk about bright highlights drawing the eye. I would have been inclined to maybe crop this section off to get rid of this bright highlight bottom left, because that was pulling my eye a wee bit. This is a great bit of natural history thing, and it was a bit like the other one that we looked at. I think it will stand a wee bit of sharpening this one to a similar effect. I'm going to again use the unsharp mask at around about 100% and maybe take about 0.4, 0.5 of a pixel, and you can see how the structure of this leaf, of this wing is now shown in detail. And see all the detail in here and along the dragonfly's back, and it's even starting to pick out a bit more detail in the legs here. If I undo that, just watch what happens to the wing when I take off that little bit of sharpening that I've done there. I hate to see over sharpening, and you need to be very careful with it because you can ruin an image by over sharpening. But sometimes when you're taking a large image down, resizing it to enter into competition, because you've lost so many pixels, they do need that little bit of sharpening. So something like about 100% on the unsharp mask at around about 4.5 of a pixel does make a difference. But I gave that one another one that I did enjoy, a great bit of natural history photography, and I marked that one at 18 points. Bugs Life, again, great bit of natural history photography, got in really tight on this one. It is, again, critically sharp where it needs to be sharp. You're never going to get the whole of this beetle sharp, because the tiny, you've got in really close, so you're going to struggle to get any more depth of field than you've got in this image. I think that the focusing has been handled really well. And a nice diffuse background to separate it from the background. This again is one that I think needed a little bit of tweak, in because I looked at the histogram on this one and I thought it was lacking in the, it just looked a little bit dark, I'll put it that way. And when I looked at the histogram, which I'll show you now, by looking at the levels, I can see, as I explained earlier, this part of the graph is showing you the black pixels, and this part of the graph is showing you the light pixels. And I can see by looking at this gap on the graph here on the light side of the histogram that it's just lacking in brightness. And so the thing to do is just pick up the white cursor there and slide it along to a point where you're starting to get the detail in there, and just see how it's lifting it without burning it out. If I take that away, it takes it back to where we were. So just little things like that, just a little bit of editing, I think would have made this one even stronger. But as it was, I gave it 18 marks. Very nice piece of natural history close-up work. Last one of the night. Bird's head or feather. So the photographer's posing a question for us here. It's really sharp and very well exposed. There's some lovely light across it, which brings out the iridescence of the feather. And that's all been really well handled, sharp and really well exposed and well lit. And that all works quite well. Now this has become a bit of still life really by using this feather and placing it on something that looks like a granite worktop or something. So it's been entirely under your control. And when we're doing this kind of work with still life, it's worth playing around with positioning of the object that you're photographing, and maybe even playing around with the base that you're using for the photograph. For me, I just thought it would have been quite a bit stronger if we'd used the main structure of the feather on a diagonal to take it through the picture from corner to corner. And I'm not sure this base is the right base for this subject, and I was wondering what would have worked better. I thought maybe just even the lawn, a bit of grass, or maybe a nice bit of sandstone or something would have been a better base for this one. But these are the things, fine tuning. Once we've, I mean, the main thing is to find this lovely feather the way it is and photograph it the way you have in terms of sharpness and lighting, exposure, depth of field. That's all been handled really well. It's just a case of what do we do with it in terms of positioning it and what kind of base. So just for that reason, I held it back a wee bit because it is very well done apart from that, and I gave it 16 marks. I stop sharing now. Did you get all that?
That was excellent. Thank you so much, Malcolm. That was really good. And actually, I think the idea of showing us those tweaks and everything was a really bit of helpful input. So I certainly appreciated some of the comments. And thanks again for giving us our initiation into this procedure.
Right. Well, I hope it seemed okay from your end. I couldn't see anyone's faces. I don't know what kind of reaction I was getting, but I enjoyed having a look at them and going through them again. Anyway, thanks very much for letting me see them.
Yeah, it must be so difficult not getting that. I mean, you don't even get the murmurs and the mumbles and the little grumbles in the background.
Yeah. It's unfortunate. I know. I think we had 1 or 2 larger meetings at committee meetings, and you get some really horrible sound effects when you've got 12 microphones open all at the same time. Mm-hmm. And so Zoom doesn't handle that particularly well, unfortunately. So yeah, you've got to switch the mics off, I'm afraid.
Right. So no, thanks again. That was excellent. I'll just bring up the results.
Zoe looks different, doesn't she?
Mm.
Right, hopefully everyone can see that. So there were 12 separate entries, and 3 people became equal second with 53 marks. There was a couple of images that I thought I should include that weren't in the placed images that got 19. And there was 1 first place of 57 marks. So Peter Littlewood came equal second, including that really nice picture of the squirrel tucking into the pumpkin.
Well done, Peter.
Thank you, Helen. So well done, Peter. A nice set of images. That was great. Also equal second was Kath
Well done,
Posh
Kath.
with,
Well done, Kath.
Well
Well
done.
done.
so they were a nice, you know, like a nice nature set, weren't they? That work really well together.
Thanks for that.
So well done, Kath. That was excellent. And Helen was
Oh,
also
Helen.
equal second with a really nice set of images. And like Malcolm, I really did appreciate your picture of the trees. I thought that was, you know, superb. So
Thank you.
well done,
Well
Helen.
done, Helen.
Yeah, well done, Helen. Lovely
Well
set.
done.
Well done.
Just two images that I thought I ought to pick out. So these two individual images both scored 19, and Zoe, I agreed with Malcolm that was really an interesting take, an excellent piece of observation. You know what I mean? It's the kind of thing that catches an eye, and it's having that ability just to click onto a picture that everyone else would just walk past. So well done, Zoe, on that one. I thought that was really nice done.
Have a go.
Thanks, well done, everybody, as well.
And Don, I mean, you did. So Don, you also got 19 for this picture of the tulips, and it's nice to take a picture of what would ordinarily be just like a boring clump of tulips. And I thought you'd just done well to lift that just a little bit out of the ordinary. So well done on that. Well done, Don and Zoe, for those two.
Thank you.
Well done.
Well done, Don.
And then Graham Robinson got.
Oh, yay. Well done.
Well done, Graham.
Thanks. I'm joking. Well done.
So well done, Graham.
It was judged
Quite good.
completely anonymously.
Oh, well done, Graham. They're brilliant.
No,
They are, they're lovely.
But anyway, again, just to reiterate our debt of gratitude to Malcolm.
Very good.
That was, I really, I entered this with not a small degree of trepidation.
Right, come in. It's fine.
And I was really pleased that we got, you know, a dozen people on the call, which was really excellent. Yeah, so I don't know. All I would just say is thank you again, Malcolm. So that's brilliant.
Okay, my pleasure. Thank you for letting me see that.
Thank you.
And, that's
Welcome.
the
Excellent.
invitation I mentioned. Just let Graham know if you want to link into our sessions on a Wednesday night, and we'll sort that out for you.
Many thanks. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
If everyone wanted to stay on, Malcolm, you're welcome to stay on, or you just welcome to drop off, which at your discretion.
If you don't mind, I think you're going to show some of Richard's work, aren't you?
correct.
Is that a plan? If you don't mind, I'll drop out because we've got a North York South Durham Interclub competition ongoing as I speak. So I'm going to see if I can catch up with what's been going on.
Oh, well, anyway, so thank you so much again for taking the time out of your schedule. It's been brilliant.
Thank you, Malcolm.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Oh, okay. Well, thanks everyone. I thought that went okay. So that was great.
It went really well, Graham. Thanks
Yes, you've done
for
good.
organising it for us.
Right. So, obviously, between the lockdowns and things, we did have, you know, the unfortunate news of the passing of Richard. So, Don was the first to suggest to me that we ought to do something to mark the event, and I think the general feeling was that would be appropriate. So I just thought I would just put together a short 2-minute silent slideshow of some of his images so that we could just take a moment of appropriate respect, really. Oh. No, I can't work it, can I? You thought I might practice this, don't you? It was all going so very well. All right.
Thank you for putting that together, Graham. It was a great tribute to Richard, and he'll be very sadly missed within the club when we manage to get started again. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Graham, and thanks a lot, Don, for
Definitely.
suggesting it. Much appreciated.
Right, so anyway, thanks everyone for coming and making a good evening of it. If people feel it's worth a stab, I would be willing to try and pull another meeting off for next Thursday if people felt they would be able to rejoin.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, Zoom works really well, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So if anyone has any particular suggestions, then we'll maybe try and do a home brew for next week, and then maybe in a fortnight's time, because apparently I was talking to Malcolm and he said that a lot of the people who do these Zoom talks are now quite heavily subscribed now. So some of them are a bit hard to get hold of. But maybe, we've got a couple more meetings that we can squeeze in on this month's subscription. So maybe we should try and organise for Thursday and Thursday week if people were feeling that was worthwhile.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
It will be worthwhile, very worthwhile, Graham.
So if anyone has any suggestions of what we might do next week, otherwise I'll just try and pull something out of the air for next week. But anyway, that's great. Anyway, so I'll let you all get back to real life.
Real life.
I'll have a game of blankety blank while you're there.
This is real life, sadly.
Yeah.
Our real life now, new reality, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Oh, thank you so much, Graham, for doing this.
Okay,
Yeah,
no,
definitely.
so thanks very much, and cheerio now. Thanks very much.
Thank you,
Okay,
Graham.
see you later. Thanks, Graham. Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, guys.